It's in the paramedics.
Yeah.
Okay, whether we are CPR certified or not, right? It's time to get started.
Okay.
So we're doing 2 more sessions this after today, right? So for next time, we're going to be looking at questions of morality and what it means to lead a good life, right? So the big questions you guys are going to want to pay attention to for all of these thinkers, right, is how do they define what is good, right? What does it mean to them to be good? And where they think morality originates, right? Where do they think it comes from? How do they think we become moral? So, let's see, who's in here? Jesus. So, working on Aristotle, be Rachel, Lindsay, Dacia, and Michaela. So Dacia and Michaela, you're both here, great. Working on David Hume will be Slayton, Jerica, Michael, and Heat. Jerica? Okay, sorry. Working on John Stuart Mill, be Drew, Morgan, Kaysen, and Jessica. I realize I've stuck you with John Stuart Mill twice, and I didn't mean to do that, but yeah. Okay, great. Mostly I've just been trying to keep everybody from working with the same people every time. Nietzsche will be Janaya, Alan, Tanner, and Nita. Nietzsche, yes. Friedrich Nietzsche. All right, so for those of you who are working on Aristotle, what does Aristotle regard as the basic function of human life? And how does he define what is good for human beings? Right, you're going to want to answer the same question, as I said, for all of these thinkers. Right, what does it mean to be good? What does Aristotle mean by virtue? And how does he think one acquires it? What are feelings, capacities, and dispositions? And how do they relate to virtue? And finally, what is the mean? How does reaching for it help us to achieve virtue? So those of you who are working on Aristotle next time, you're going to be spending a lot of time defining terms, right? He throws a lot of terms out here, and you're going to be spending a lot of time trying to figure out exactly what he means by all of thes, right? That's going to be the key to working with this. Does anybody still need this? Can I move on? We're good? Okay. Right, so those of you who are working on Friedrich Nietzsche against conventional morality, does Nietzsche define morality the same way Aristotle or any other more traditional thinker would? What's the major difference in Nietzsche's concept of morality or moralities? Secondly, which does Nietzsche consider more genuinely moral? Maintaining one's individual integrity or engaging in pro-social behavior with others, and why? Third, what's Nietzsche's complaint about the way thinkers usually approach the problem of morality? And finally, does Nietzsche think that moral virtue is in any way related to happiness, and so what? Anybody still need this? Those of you who are working with this have got it? Okay. All right, so for David Hume, where does Hume believe moral distinctions originate, and how does this go against what he claims is conventional wisdom? What does Hume mean when he talks about social virtues? And so what that he regards virtue as a social quality, right? What does this tell us about his thought in general? And finally, how does Hume balance our self-interest against our feelings for others? What does this have to do with the way he classifies different virtues? And finally, right, John Stuart Mill. Utilitarianism, yes. On what basis does Mill decide whether an action is right or wrong? What does Mill think makes an action right, and so what? How does Mill define happiness? And what does he mean when he talks about the greatest happiness principle? And finally, does Mill regard all forms of pleasure or happiness as equally moral? Why or why not? All right, any questions about any of this?
When is this one due?
This is for Wednesday.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what we're going to be doing on Wednesday.
But it's due Friday.
Yeah,
Papers
if
due
you get the
Friday.
reflection paper in by Friday, that's fine,
Okay.
yes. If you get it in earlier, that's also fine.
Will it be graded faster?
It might.
I'll do it tonight.
All right, so for today, right, what we're looking at, I can get rid of this, right? Okay. Right, the thinkers that you are looking at today, to review slightly from last time, are all concerned in some way with the question of free will. Right, so how did we define free will last time? Does anybody remember?
The ability to make
Ability to
your
act.
choices.
Yeah, the ability to make your own choices, right? The ability to choose for yourself. Whether to act or not to act, right, and what sorts of actions you will take, right? There are some thinkers who would argue that you can have freedom of action without actually having free will, right? So we'll get to talking about some of that as well. But the opposite of free will, you may recall, we call determinism. So if free will means that you are free to make your own choices, what must determinism mean if it's the opposite?
You're not free to make your own choices.
Yeah, that someone or something else has already made those choices for you or is making those choices for you, right? So this is the basic distinction that you're going to be working with when you break into your groups to talk, right? You're gonna want to figure out where your philosopher fits on the continuum between free will and determinism, right? Nobody is going to be a perfect, like a total perfect fit for either of these, right? It's going to be a to what extent kind of issue. To what extent does Augustine believe in free will? To what extent is Sartre determinist, right? That sort of thing. The other thing you're going to want to think about, right, is whether we can or cannot choose for ourselves what are the consequences of our actions? And secondly, who does your philosopher think is ultimately responsible for the choices you make, and so what? Now you would think a free will philosopher would say that you're fully responsible for the choices you make, right? And that a determinist philosopher would say that you are not responsible for the choices you make. But you're going to find that it's not nearly as clear-cut as that, right? All right, so break up into your groups. Does everybody remember who they're supposed to be working with?
No.
Okay, it's been a little while. Okay, so,
Augustine's
all right, so Augustine group, come over here. If you're working with Hobbes, over here. If you're working with Sartre, over here. And if you're working with Harry G. Frankfurt, over on the far side of the room. All right, so you're already where you need to be.
So we're the only two people get calls? They get it.
Who you got?
Basically, this man was like, you got free will.
You're supposed to be with the Augustine
It's
people.
like,
Yeah, that's what I thought. I
Yeah.
didn't hear his name.
But you don't have free will.
Who you got? I think I'm the only one here for.
You're the only one who showed up for Augustine. This is,
It's not.
He knows when I have you started.
yeah, right before SARS. Right?
Yeah.
That's
It was like for an argument.
Yeah, I mean, but I don't want you to have to work by yourself. You're okay with that?
Whenever.
All right. This is the problem with group, is that if not everybody shows up, the group falls apart.
I'm just gonna go back and read.
You're given the guidelines through